Thank you. And I guess I really apologize for bringing you in on this beautiful April day. I think we should all just migrate outside and think blue and green and the past, present, and especially the future of what we're going to do about this and us with relation to this. I am so grateful to today have been visiting institutions here and earlier today that really convey the ethic of connecting humans to nature. And I really respect and applaud Peter Wege and the family, all of you, for understanding that without the natural world, there is no us. We are totally dependent on nature. You go to most schools and you learn your ABCs, you learn your numbers, but where do you learn that we're connected to nature? Especially in the world as it is today, with so much of the planet cementified, with people distanced from the source of food, water, don't know where air comes from, take it for granted, and therefore are complacent about what's happening. They just, even though the knowledge is there, the public at large generally seems to be unaware of how much trouble we're in. We have, for the first time, the capacity to really understand how connected we are and that we are dependent on nature. Much of what we know about the world has been acquired, the knowledge, in the last century, especially the latter part of the 20th century and now creeping into the 21st. The capacity to communicate is unparalleled. When I think about what has happened in just my lifetime, let alone Peter Wege's lifetime, which isn't that much longer than mine, that I tell people sometimes I come from a different planet. And they say, no kidding. We knew that. But truly, the world that I knew as a child is so different from the world that I live in today that it is a different planet, a different place. More change in the last 100 years than during all preceding history. And I suppose you could move that up and say the last 50 years. I come from the pre-Plasticozoic. The idea of cell phones. Well, in fact, just having television images grabbed out of the air that appear in these boxes in your living room. I mean, we all do take it for granted. Cease to ask, how did it all happen? It's just there. But what will it be in the future if we fail to take care of this blessed blue planet? I gave a talk at the World Bank a couple of years ago, and as I was walking up to the podium, it occurred to me, there it is, and I said so, the World Bank. That's where all the assets are. That's the base of everything. What do you care about? The economy? Your health? Security? Surely you care about life. If you do care about any of those things, then you have to care about this place that we have inherited and we're going to pass along to whoever follows or whatever follows. Never before in our history has it been possible to appreciate the way we now can. What a miracle it is that Earth exists at all. That view that we now have that appears in books, kids grow up with it these days, a view of Earth from afar that we did not have until 1969 when the first astronauts went up in the sky. I mean, we could hypothesize about it, and we did. Globes that I had in my classroom, but they looked kind of flat. They didn't really convey the beauty of this place, the blues, the greens, the golds, the silvery white aspect that aliens might see if they're out there somewhere viewing this planet from afar. And where we are in the solar system and looking out to the universe beyond, where is there any place like this, let alone any place that we could conveniently get to? You think about the moon. we can, probably will, if we keep our act together, establish outposts on Mars, the Moon and Mars, and maybe go further into the solar system. But it isn't a very friendly place out there. We have to take our life support system with us if we go to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. The atmosphere of Mars is the way the early atmosphere of Earth is thought to have been, mostly carbon dioxide. It's taken a long time and a lot of photosynthesizing to whittle down the carbon dioxide, generate enough oxygen, shape the planet to be in a place that's, suitable for the likes of us and all the rest of life on Earth. So how is it that we so take it for granted? I suppose part of it stems from the belief that we're so small, the Earth is so big, there's not much that puny human beings can do to change the way the world works. That's what we used to think. Certainly it's true of the ocean. And the policies that now guide the way we behave toward the ocean were born of a time when it seemed that the world was so big, especially the ocean, that the atmosphere above, there's not anything that we could do, we used to think, that we could put into the atmosphere that would cause harm because it's so vast. Or the ocean. We used to think of it as the ultimate best place to put things we didn't want close at hand. We took it out in deep, sixed it, whatever it was, garbage, pollutants, toxins, trash, whatever. We have learned over the last few decades that there are limits to what we can get away with without consequences back not just to the ocean, but to us. The ocean has changed, is changing. The planet is changing as a consequence of what one species, that would be us, what we're doing. And it isn't because we intend for these changes to take place, it's because we haven't known until just about now that we had that kind of power, that individuals times hundreds of millions times a few billion can really influence the nature of nature. For me, it's been a journey largely blue, diving in, starting in 1952 when my brother borrowed a copper diving helmet in a conspiracy with our next door neighbor. The son of our next door neighbor was a sponge diver in Tarpon Springs, Florida. We kind of borrowed his copper diving helmet and the pump that pumps the air, compresses the air. We went to the Wege River. I was the tag-along kid sister and had a chance to see what it was like to breathe underwater by having air supplied into this helmet in the river. But it was the next year I was the tag-along undergraduate student in a graduate class that I talked my way into in marine biology, the second time marine biology had been taught at Florida State University. We had two of the first scuba tanks in the country, 1953, and I was one of the lucky ones who had a chance to try it out. We were allowed to jump over the side of a small boat about 5 miles offshore from St. Mark's River in Florida, Florida State University, and we had 2 words of instruction: breathe naturally. And I survived, and so did everybody else at the time. And that's good advice, don't hold your breath when you have compressed air in your lungs. I try to do that whenever I'm breathing compressed air. Or anytime, breathe naturally. It's good advice. And now, after many thousands of hours underwater breathing naturally, it has given me a perspective that I am compelled to share, because not everybody has had the chance that I have to not just dive, but to live underwater. I've done it now 9 different times where I get to stay underwater in a little underwater laboratory. First time was in 1970, during an era when footprints were still being put on the moon. And for the first time, there were footprints being put on the bottom of the ocean. In a sense, we were able to stay for days, weeks. One crew in 1969 actually stayed for a month, 2 months, in an underwater laboratory down in the US Virgin Islands. It was a time when we were thinking about space, looking skyward, as well as going deep in the sea. And it seemed that the exploration of the sea would continue on a fast track, much as our reach for the skies above. And part of it stemmed from the excitement over having aquanauts who were living underwater at the same time that there were astronauts up in the sky. So when this little notice came on the bulletin board, I was at Harvard at the time, that said, if you would like to live underwater and spend 2 weeks as a scientist, submit your proposal here and it will be considered. So I submitted my proposal along with some of my fellow scientists, and they didn't really expect women to apply. I was very curious. They didn't bother, it was so didn't think that women would apply, they didn't bother to say that women need not apply. But a number of us did. And I got this curious call from Jim Miller, who was head of the program, who sort of talked me through the issues and whether I really wanted to do this. And you know, the equipment we'd be using would be kind of heavy, and he described how the rebreathers would weigh 70 pounds. And I said, well, double tanks weigh 65 pounds. What's 5 pounds, one way or the other? In the water, they don't weigh anything anyway. So anyway, it turns out that he was the one who finally had to make the call. A lot of the guys in the Navy were against it. Some of the scientists didn't think that women should do this. But he said, well, half the fish are female. I guess we can put up with a few women. And they did. They didn't call us aquanauts, they called us aqua belles, aqua chicks, aqua naughties. Oh, good heavens. But frankly, we didn't care what they called us, just so they let us go. Because think about it, how would you like to spend a couple of weeks on a reef with fish as your neighbors? I had a chance to go diving in the Florida Keys once with Fred Rogers. And it was really cool because he took off his shoes and he put on his fins. He took off his sweater and he put on his skins. And we went in the fish's neighborhood, as he put it, and had the greatest time getting acquainted with the creatures that were there. And then he celebrated it on one of his programs. So what happened when I did this was just a change in perspective. I mean, I come from a seafood eating family. I didn't really think much about what fish do, that they have day-night behavior, that they have personality, that they have faces, that they're individuals, just like cats and dogs and horses and people and things. But living underwater, even though I'd been in and out already for more than 1,000 hours of exploring and getting acquainted with creatures, it just didn't occur to me. But I got to know individual fish day and night doing that. And later, when I had a chance to break out and use little submarines to go deep, to have a chance to explore places, to see that there are neighborhoods underwater, just as there are above, that we know in the woods there are groups of animals that live in a place and that we are part of this whole system. But somehow the ocean seems remote out there, and we haven't had the same kind of affection for creatures of the sea that we've developed over the years for creatures with fur and feathers and even scales of the sort that are covering turtles and even other reptiles. In the ocean, things with scales are thought about primarily as something to eat. They're commodities until you really get to know them. Mosquitoes probably think of us as commodities too. You know? We're just something to eat. If only they knew us. Having come along in an era when little submarines that enable you to live underwater, to work underwater, actually can stay for hours, but not usually days at a time. 1 atmosphere, no decompression. You can stay at 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet, or if you have the right equipment, you can go 10,000 feet underwater where there's immense pressure. But you don't have to decompress. In fact, we don't know how to dive subjected to that kind of pressure at 10,000 feet. Even 1,000 feet takes very special techniques, and only a few people have been able to master the fine art of using mixes of gases. Commercial divers do it for the oil field and for commercial exploration and work to treasure hunters. Some of them have done that with exotic mixes of gases. But this is so easy. You just get into a little sports car and drive off into the ocean. And 1 atmosphere, you can stay for 6 hours or 8 hours and come back and hop out. And it's really cool. And I hope someday that you'll all have a chance to get into a little submarine, that there will be Hertz Renesubs, that you can go out and dive into the Great Lakes and go down and see what the fish are like, see what the shipwrecks are like. Just cruise around and get to know your own blue backyard. I mean, it's such a gift that we are around at a time when we have the technology to enable us to explore places that I could only dream about when I was a kid, and no generation prior to that. Just last September, I went to the Cocos Islands offshore from Costa Rica. It was a National Geographic expedition. There were a number of scientists. We had this little submarine called I love the name of it. It's called the Deep Sea, S-E-E, And see, we did. We went in, 3 of us at a time, a pilot and 2 observers. It's like being the Wizard of Oz. You're in a bubble and can just cruise around and see what's happening in the depths. It's just such a wonderful thing. And actually, tourists now can go to Cocos Island and, pay for a ticket to go explore in a vehicle like this. Around the world, there are now more than 30 passenger submarines. I think there are 5 in Hawaii alone. They don't go quite as deep, but they take more passengers. It's like getting on a bus to, even if you don't like to get wet, and I do, but some people don't, just get a ticket, get on the bus, go down and look at the fish, the way fish see fish. Occasionally you're treated to the sight of a whale, or sometimes looking out through the window, you see a whale shark. You can do that in Hawaii. It happens sometimes. Certainly it did happen while we were in Cocos last September. Whale sharks were in the area. These are the biggest fish in the sea, gentle giants, part of the system that makes the world function as it does. In my time, I've seen a change of attitude of sharks as being horrendously dangerous creatures that you don't want to go into the water because you might see a shark or have a shark see you. Now the real problem is that sharks are getting scarce. It's a good day when you see a shark underwater, not a day to be scared. And in fact, when I heard that sharks were man-eaters, I stopped worrying because I figured I didn't qualify. But now, really, we have come to understand that we really are not generally on the menu of sharks. They've been around for 300 million years, eating fish, lobsters, all the other stuff that we think of as seafood, sea life actually, that they have been consuming. They were on the planet long before dinosaurs, and they're still around. There aren't that many species actually when you think of, compared to insects, there may be 500,000 kinds of insects that we currently know about. How many more are there that we don't know about? We're just beginning to explore the deepest parts of rainforests and other systems and to look seriously. There are only 300, maybe 400 kinds of sharks, but they are important to the ocean. They live a long time. They may take 10 years to mature, may live to be 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And this craze about killing sharks for sport is part of the problem. Killing sharks for shark fin soup is a new problem. In just the last few decades, since I was a kid, on the order of 90% of the big sharks are gone. That's bad news for the ocean. It's also bad news for us, because we need a healthy ocean, and sharks are part of what makes the ocean healthy, just as the Inuit say that wolves keep the caribou strong. Sharks keep the fish strong. And so do the other predatory carnivorous fish, like grouper. This is a scene taken in Cocos. Grouper. I mean, I almost fell off my flippers when I saw images such as this, a place that's still in great shape, where you see a lot of predators, a lot of sharks. That previous image, those 2 were from Cocos Island, where we had the little submersible. It's far enough offshore, and to avoid much of the heavy-duty fishing pressure that has taken place in nearshore areas over the last few centuries, especially the last few decades. So there's a little haven there, and the country of Costa Rica has designated Cocos as a protected area. It's a World Heritage Area. The fish don't know that. They just know that living is pretty good out there. But other places, grouper are so rare that in the Florida Keys, one of them at least, the Nassau grouper is on the endangered species list. The others should be. Our appetite for them is so great. Their problem is they taste good. It's okay in a way because, you know, they're part of the food chain. They're carnivores, far up the top of the food chain, actually. We're part of the food chain. But this is new territory for humans. We have entered the sea as predators seriously, mostly in the 20th century. We certainly have a long history of consuming ocean wildlife and from lakes, rivers, and streams, but nothing like the pressure we have put on aquatic systems in the 20th century and now moving into the 21st. Today, we take on the order of 100 million tons of ocean wildlife every year. Actually, 80 million or so is about the level, but if you count the bycatch, that those creatures that are caught and discarded, it's in excess of 100 million tons of creatures that are just extracted from the ocean. And we once thought, hey, that's a good thing. We need to get up to that scale of extraction because we have a lot of people to feed. The trouble is, moving in the direction that we now are, this can't last. By the middle of the 20th century, we won't be taking grouper or snapper or swordfish or tuna or sharks or flounder or halibut or many of the freshwater creatures as well, because they'll be gone, pressed beyond the point that they can recover. Commercial fishing will be gone. There may be a few scattered elements left, just as with birds. There was a time when the skies were darkened with birds, and we wouldn't have any probably today of some species. We have lost some in North America and around the world. Birds have been depleted greatly over what they were 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 100 years ago, 50 years ago. But the good news is we came to some point of awareness, and it really began largely in the 20th century with the ethic of the land, with Aldo Leopold, with Peter Wege, with people who got it, who said, look, birds need forests, but so do we. We need birds. They're part of what makes the world work. We've got to protect them. We have to learn how to live in harmony with the natural world, or else we're done. That's our life support system. I heard Peter Wege say that today. It's what I also have been saying. The world that we occupy has many other occupants. We need to respect them, respect their space, recognize that we live because they live. If they cease to prosper, we cease to prosper. The connection is increasingly clear. And, oh, by the way, look at that face. Look at that face. It's not just a face that a mother parrotfish can love. It's a face that I have come to have a feeling of affection for, too. And there aren't any two parrotfish faces exactly alike. The spots are different on every single one. It's a staggering concept. If you open a can of sardines, imagine there aren't any two alike, even though you like to think they look alike. Certainly when they get squished in a can, they do look alike. But even when you see a school of fish, or if you casually look at a dozen of these blue speckled rays, the first glance might suggest that they're all alike, just like looking at a herd of zebra. They all look confusingly alike, but if you really look at them, or line up 20 black cats, they're all black cats, they all look alike until you look at the expressions on their faces, the eyes. Some are larger, some are smaller, and they behave differently. Have any of you ever had two cats that ever were exactly alike? I haven't. They are so different. And once you know that, you just look at creatures in the sea in a different way. It doesn't mean that people stop eating fish, but a greater kind of respect is attained when you think of them as something other than just a piece of meat. People who have lived necessarily from wildlife do understand that you have to have respect. In some of the native peoples of island countries, the successful ones protect the sources of their sustenance. Just as with Ducks Unlimited, they realize if you want to have a few birds to take home for dinner once in a while, you can't take them anytime, anywhere, in any numbers. You have to protect the breeding areas, the feeding areas, marshes, rock. You need marshes so that you can have birds, because they need it, and if you want birds, that's the price you pay. A lot of other reasons why marshes are valuable, but that's one. Same is true in the ocean. If you want to have fish, going forward, we have to protect big chunks of the ocean where they feed, where they breed, the nursery areas, the corridors over which they pass. We can't feel that we can take them anywhere in any numbers at any time. Well, that's what we have thought. That's what a lot of people still think. And the consequence is that we're running out. The ocean is depleted of the large predatory fish. 90% is a big number, especially when you think that we've lost that many in a few decades of these big creatures, the tunas. Again, swordfish, halibut. What do you like to eat from the sea? It's in trouble because of our appetite and our lack of understanding. I attended the CITES meeting, the Convention on International Trade for Endangered Species in Doha just a few weeks ago, where the decision was made to not impose trade restrictions for bluefin tuna, to not protect these creatures that are so valuable now. A single fish can sell for more than $100,000, and it's not even a grown-up fish yet. They can, when grown up, be more than 1,000 pounds. A 400-pound bluefin tuna sold for $183,000 at the Tokyo Fish Market, which provides incentive to take the very last one. It may bring somebody $1 million, but then it's over. And it's almost over now, because we can't resist eating them. And sharks. Shark fin soup is a new craze, sweeping not just China, not just Asia, but you can go into Chinese restaurants in almost any major city in the world and find as a delicacy shark fin soup. But this is the price. We're losing sharks. Shark fin soup used to be such a delicacy that only the emperor and a few in the nobility could occasionally be treated to shark fin soup. It was so difficult to get shark fins. It's not that it tastes all that good, it's because it's so special. It's like having hummingbird tongues on toast. You know, it's such a special treat that only a few people can afford it. Now, with new wealth in Asia, anybody can afford $100 for a bowl of soup. I mean, it's pricey, but it's accessible. But it won't happen much longer if we continue to take from the ocean as we have been. The methods we use for extracting ocean wildlife are brutal. The trawls that scrape the ocean floor to bring you that shrimp cocktail or popcorn shrimp, or how do you like your shrimp? If you've seen Forrest Gump, imagine the many ways you can consume shrimp. And you probably also saw scenes like this in Forrest Gump, where you drag the seafloor, you take what you catch in the net, you dump it out on the deck, and out comes this whole city, and you shovel most of what's there over the side, and you take home a little armful of shrimp. It's like using a bulldozer in a forest to catch songbirds or squirrels. You throw the forest away and you take home a little protein. It isn't a system that has any legitimate purpose anymore, now that we know. In the early days of fishing, these big nets, trawls, long lines, now some 50, 60 miles long with baited hooks every few feet, with bait alone that would feed a small country, the squid, the mackerel that are considered throwaways, and the bycatch of creatures such as this, a coral thousands of years old, just snatched out of their deep sea realm and thrown away. What they're after are orange roughy, fish that live a long time. It takes 30 years for them to mature. Anybody ever heard of raising a 30-year-old cow or chicken? But because the ocean does it naturally, we don't think anything about going out and just mining creatures that, well, it takes 30 years to mature. The creatures in this net may be 100 or even 200 years old. And they're taken when they're getting together to hoop it up to make more orange roughy. So you get big collections of them. They don't do this every year, but now with the new means of finding orange roughy with, quotes, fish finders, acoustic means, there's no escape. You can catch orange roughy wherever orange roughy live. They used to be protected by their inaccessibility, no more. And yet, it sells in my local supermarket in Oakland, California for $8.99 a pound. I mean, it's got to be worth more than that. It should be sold for $1 million a pound, and even that, you can't put them back once they're gone. And wouldn't you like to know how to live to be 200 years? I mean, I would. They have somehow mastered the fine art. They're fellow vertebrates. They have a backbone, they have heart, they have circulatory system, they have brains. Some of us have brains. And so, you know, physiologically, here's a creature. Another example would be the bowhead whales, fellow mammals that are known to live as much as 200 years. What's their secret? What's their secret? Is the best thing to do just to turn them into a sandwich or whatever it is that we're doing with them? With whales, this is a humpback whale, they can be as old as we are, at least 80, 90, 100 years. Think of what they've seen in their lifetime. Think of what Peter Wege has seen in his, or any of you have seen in yours. The changes that are unparalleled in all of human history. We've lived, even 10-year-olds have lived the equivalent of centuries of change of any time going in the past. Whether you're talking about technological changes, changes in our understanding of our own bodies, the health issues, if you think about the political changes that have swept the planet in the last few decades, even the last 10 years. The changes in the environment itself, in the atmosphere above, the oceans, the wildlife, the changes that are just so dramatic as all at once. I mean, population, the world, our place in it, moved along at a fairly steady pace, but then started to amp up in the Industrial Revolution, and it continues at a pace that is staggering. So the good news is that in this short period of time, where we have experienced the equivalent of centuries or even millennia in single lifetimes, in terms of the ability to change and absorb new insights, new knowledge, that now we're the first, probably the first people on the planet to really live up to the name of Homo sapiens, the species that knows, that has the power to understand. The whales, orange roughy, may know that the world has changed during their lifetime, but they don't know why. They don't know what to do about it. We do know why, and we're the only ones with the power to do something about it. And even the power to do something about it would have eluded those going back a century, let alone 1,000 years, because they didn't have the technologies, they didn't have the ability to share information or to get people mobilized around the world to move in a different direction, one that will more likely give us an enduring future instead of one that is troublesome, troubled by the concern. What do we do with all this plastic? It's here. Now what do we do? We thought it was such a good idea when plastic came along. And it is a good idea. Plastic is not the problem. It's what we do with it that really is the problem. And now we have an opportunity to make something of it. Birds don't have the choices, we do. Like the albatrosses that swoop around and pick up bits of plastic and stuff their youngsters with it, thinking that they're giving them something nutritious, and what they're giving them is a death sentence. Thousands, tens of thousands of seabirds die because they're stuffed with plastics. They never get to fly and become parents themselves. That mass of colorful debris over on the left side of the screen came from one bird. And the debris of old fishing nets, discarded nets that just haunt the ocean, people call them ghost nets, continue to fish. Every year we lose on the order of 300,000 marine mammals as incidental catch, bycatch, thousands of dolphins, whales, sea lions, otters, just die needlessly because of either not deliberate, but they get accidentally caught in active fishing nets, or these old discarded ones that keep fishing and fishing and fishing for decades. I mean, we should think this is just unacceptable now that we know, and now that we have power to do something about it. It starts with knowing. I mean, this turtle could have been around for 100 years, and maybe it will, because he was found before it was too late. We managed in the Cocos Islands to free him of his entanglement with some old fishing gear. Most creatures aren't that lucky that get entangled. This is good news. This is students volunteering their summers to go out to the Northwest Hawaiian Islands and work with NOAA to haul discarded fishing gear out of the ocean and try to dispose of it in some positive way, perhaps to reappear again as a polar fleece jacket or some other worthy life. But this is it, this blue place that we call home. Now that we can see it through the eyes of astronauts, any little kid can do that. You can get your laptop or your desktop and punch in Google Earth, fly around and visit places, see the sands of Africa sweeping across the Atlantic Ocean and landing here on the Great Lakes, or continuing on to Colorado and darkening the snow, or continuing on beyond that to the other side of the world. Now we know with the capacity to see the whole world and how things connect, that climate change is a reality. We can, based on evidence that scientists have been collecting over the last few decades, that the trends are there, they're real. Every summer, the ice melts to some extent in the Arctic and in the Antarctic, but every winter it reforms, or it has for such a long time. But now, in a very short period of time, the rate of warming is accelerating. Bad news for polar bears, bad news for us. I have a home in the red zone in Florida. The sea level rise is one of the consequences of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that promotes warming, that has this whole host of climate change issues. And there's a flip side to that. The terrible twin of global warming or climate change is acidification, excess carbon dioxide becoming carbonic acid. You say, well, who cares? I mean, coral reefs are pretty, but what difference does it make to me if there aren't any anymore? What difference does it make to me, you might ask, if coccolithophorids, I've never heard of them before, these little tiny creatures that have a calcium carbonate shell that, oh, by the way, churn out oxygen and grab carbon out of the atmosphere. If they're in trouble, we're in trouble, because it's where much of our oxygen comes from. It's not just the green things on the land, although that's important. It's little green guys and blue-green things in the ocean that do much of the heavy lifting that keeps us alive. Coral reefs are at risk because of acidification and because of global warming. They don't make up a big part of ocean ecosystems, but they do make up a really important part because of the immense diversity that they harbor. And they are beautiful. If anybody values art, and most people do have a place in their heart somewhere for the beauty of what we can create as artists, but then there's the natural world, which is, all things considered, the source of inspiration for much of what we try to recreate with our means of harnessing paint and stone to reflect things that inspire us. The coral reefs are truly in trouble. They're only about half remaining in good shape in the world. The other half are either gone or they're in a state of tremendous decline. The warming helps trigger this. They call it coral bleaching. Looks like a snow field. Sometimes they do recover, but it certainly sets them back, reduces their vigor when they lose the zooxanthellae that normally make them colorful, and deliver through a partnership agreement that they've worked out over the millions of years that corals in shallow water have with the microorganisms that live in their tissues. It's amazing that we have the power to so disrupt these ancient systems. Some of these old corals that may be centuries old, this is thought to be a 500-year-old growth, that in a season can be turned into a snowball. And while it may come back for a year or two, there are very few that ultimately prosper with the same level of vitality that they had before these events take place. And part of the problem is we've already stripped out so many of the components of a coral reef that keep a system healthy and resilient. It's like saying, you know, Chicago is a city because of its buildings. Coral Reef is not just a city or a system because of its corals. In this case, the buildings are alive, but you could say that about an office building too. It's got living things inside. And if you take away from Chicago the mailmen, the trash collectors, the restaurants, the doctors, the lawyers, and anyway, you unravel the city. It isn't just the buildings that keep a city working, and it isn't just the corals. We have taken away the doctors. We've taken away the life support, basically, of the coral reefs. When you take out the sharks, you take out the grouper, you take out the lobsters, you take away the components that make a reef whole. And this happens. They just come unglued. They fall apart. Sometimes they are deliberately made to fall apart with something called dynamite. It's a fast way to catch fish. You throw a stick of dynamite in the water and boom, the coral goes into pieces like this, and the fish go belly up and you pick them up. It's a terribly destructive way of fishing, but it feeds people for a short time. But they lose the system in the long term. The good news is if you stop killing the fish, have protected areas, places have a tendency to come back. They don't always, they can't always, but it's the best hope. Just in the recent couple of weeks, I was out in the Cocos Islands fulfilling my wish that I made during a year ago at the TED conference, Technology, Entertainment, Design. This group of movers and shakers in Silicon Valley started doing this 26 years ago now, getting together, celebrating what humans can do, and recently been awarding prizes to a number of individuals. Ed Wilson was one of the prize winners, one of my great heroes, along with Peter Wege. E.O. Wilson is an individual who loves ants. When he celebrated his 80th birthday last summer, Yo-Yo Ma came and helped celebrate in New York with kids who dressed up as ants. Can you imagine Yo-Yo Ma and the ants dancing and celebrating Ed Wilson's birthday? Well, Ed Wilson wished for an encyclopedia of life, and he asked the TEDsters, the TED crowd, all Silicon Valley connected characters, to help him so that we could inventory life on Earth and make it available on anybody's desktop or cell phone or laptop or whatever, to be able to access information, an encyclopedia that we now can assemble and not only see who they are, but what's their status. Are they endangered? Or where do they live? What do they look like? It's a way to get people to understand in ways that we couldn't have done 50 years ago. My wish was to have hope spots, protected areas in the ocean, like national parks, if you will, where even the fish are safe. National parks, birds are typically safe in national parks, not all of them all the time, but there's an ethic, an understanding that we have to protect wildlife if we are to have them in the future, not just because they're beautiful, not just because they touch our hearts, but because we need them. We need the natural world. It's what we depend upon for our survival. Now we know. We have the capacity to go beyond our own planet, go to the moon, go to Mars, and it gives us perspective, needed perspective about how do we take care of the natural world that takes care of us. We depend on nature, but now nature depends on us. Ed Wilson recently at his 80th birthday party said how concerned he was about the loss of wildlife and natural systems. He said, we're letting nature slip through our fingers. We're letting it happen. But you could flip it right around, and I do. could be that in the end, nature maybe let us slip through her fingers. Life will go on, one way or the other. There will be microbes, no matter what we do to the planet. But it should be about wanting to take care of ourselves and our future as a part of nature, not apart from it, but to figure out, now that we can, what to do. And so I was so inspired to be with the kids this morning, 6th graders and high school kids. That's a powerful reason for hope. Hope spots places in the ocean large enough to protect the blue heart of the planet, the ocean, the waters of the world, not just salt water, but your Great Lakes and the rivers and streams, all of it. The waters of the world are truly the lifeblood of the planet. Without it, we don't live. But the kids get it. And we have to help them understand and to empower them. I said to them, and I'll say to you what I say a lot because I believe it, that the next 10 years may be the most important in the next 10,000 years, either because of what we do or fail to do. We've got time because we still have 10% of the sharks, half the coral reefs. We haven't lost a lot of things. There's still snow leopards out there. There's still resilience and life in the Great Lakes, despite heaps of problems that we have caused. But now we know, and now we can act. And I have a personal set of powerful reasons why I want the world to be left at least as good as I found it. There are 2 of them. I have 4 grandsons and 3 children. But it's all of the future. I would not like to be a part of the generation that future generations say, why didn't you do something when you knew? It's one thing to not know and therefore not care. It's one thing to know and not care. It's all about knowing. And we have no excuse anymore for not understanding that the world is in trouble. The ocean is in trouble, so we're in trouble. And we have a chance. But we should go flat out to do things to protect the natural world that takes care of us. I had a chance just in like 2006 to do something totally unexpected and help make a difference. And that was when I gave a talk in Spain when the head of Google Earth was scheduled to give a talk right after mine. He was sitting right in the front row, and I only had 15 minutes to tell why the ocean matters. But there was John sitting in the front row, and I love Google Earth, and I loved its predecessor called Keyhole. And now it cost $600 when you had to download it at first. Now it's free for anybody, everybody, in a much more sophisticated presentation. Street view and all of that. And so I just looked at him and I said, John, I love Google Earth, and I thank you for what you've done. My kids can see our backyard and our neighbor's backyard. We can fly around, and I just hope someday you'll finish it, because all that blue, it's just a big blob of blue, the ocean. You know, you can't see the mountains. There are lots of mountains out there. You can't see the fish. You can see things on the terrestrial part. And it just popped out. I said, John, you should call it Google Dirt. Because the land is great, but what about the ocean? And he invited me after that, instead of snubbing me, not recognizing my existence. He said, come on down to the Googleplex and meet with the Googlers and tell us what we need to do. And I said, my mind isn't big enough. I need some better brains. And so we assembled about 30 people from around the world who've been advising Google on what now any kid can download with Google 5.0. It is free. You can sweep into the ocean, come from high in the sky, drop into the sea, and go beneath the surface, and you can touch some little dots that appear all over the ocean, and then dive in. And among other things, video clips that can tell you about certain parts of the ocean, the hope spots, some of them at least. And just this week, for Earth Week, Google is releasing the next set of hope spots and places that you can fly around and get information about, places where if you do what we can do at this point, protect them, you know, drive our government and others to value ocean wildlife the way we have begun to value systems on the land. A fraction of 1% of the ocean is protected at all. So we've got a long way to go. But let me take you just to a couple of places and share with you something that I am so pleased to be having had a chance to be a part of this. Can we go to that first little video clip, please? Imagine flying around the world, and we will go in this place, I think let's go to Bermuda, to the Sargasso Sea. The reason I want to take you there is because it's a historic site. The waters around Bermuda are warmed by the Gulf Stream, one of the world's largest and swiftest ocean currents. Turn it up a little bit, I think. Humpback whales pass through these waters each year, migrating from polar feeding grounds. These waters are also known to legions of luminous deep-sea creatures and intrepid undersea explorers. In the 1930s, zoologist William Beebe and engineer Otis Barton descended 1,000 meters into the depths around Bermuda for a first view of life in a place the sunlight never reaches. Beebe compared what he saw to naked space itself, out far beyond atmosphere, between the stars, where the blackness of space, the shining planets, comets, suns, and stars must really be closely akin to the world of life as it appears to the eyes of an old human being in the open ocean, 1/2 mile down. For Beebe and Barton, the comets, suns, and stars were living creatures reflecting rainbows of iridescence, were flashing, sparkling, and glowing with their own living light. Fireflies and glowworms are famous light makers on the land, but in the deep sea, about 90% of the creatures, jellies, fish, bacteria, shrimp, squids, and many others, have some form of bioluminescence to signal one another. Scientists say these bursts of starry light may be the most common form of communication on the planet. In the open sea, jellies are also among the most abundant forms of life. The Gulf Stream current can carry these oddly beautiful drifters along at about 160 kilometers a day. Buffered by the Gulf Stream is a magically quiet, gently rotating mass of sargassum weed that expands over more than 5 million square kilometers of open waters. Isolated by walls of fast-moving currents between Bermuda and Puerto Rico, the Sargasso Sea holds a liquid jungle of creatures which have evolved over the ages to exist in floating forests of golden brown sargassum. Within its leafy, sunlit masses are camouflaged such creatures as loggerhead turtles, filefish, sea hares, and the speckled brown sargasso crab. For scientists, it's a living laboratory, strategically located in the open sea. For creatures that live in the undersea caves, among the reefs, and in the great depths below, Bermuda is simply home. So there's some pretty good news about the Sargasso Sea that just has come up in the last few months, and that is the government of Bermuda, while it has little control over the Sargasso Sea, they live right at the edge of it. Bermuda, as you know, is out in the Atlantic Ocean, and they are surrounded by a part of the Sargasso Sea, and they're taking a leadership role right now in trying to bring about public concern and awareness and support to establish a big protected area out there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's tricky because this is in the high seas for the most part, except for the area claimed by Bermuda. Nations have to agree to leave it alone and to protect it. But with Bermuda on the case and with people such as you, such as I, voicing support, it may happen. There's another area, this will be the last that I want to show, and that's, let's go to the Arctic. But before you switch it on, I just want to give you a little background because the Arctic has such a powerful impact on climate. And as the ice is melting, it's becoming accessible. And fishing fleets are being geared up to go strip the Arctic of what's there. Norway, Russia, Japan. The United States really has taken a somewhat different position. We've put a freeze, a moratorium on fishing there until at least we explore the place. I mean, what good idea. Let's explore before we exploit, instead of jumping in and just taking what we can without knowing how it might be most useful. Well, that first clip I showed you showed something of the deep history of ocean technology and our access to the sea. That was in the 1930s that William Beebe first went out in submersibles. We're still painfully behind the curve with respect to access to what goes down as compared to going high in the sky. But, for example, last week I celebrated with others in Washington, D.C., the 50th anniversary of the only occasion in history when two men actually went to the deepest part of the sea and came back. Getting there is really easy. It's the round trips, and they made a round trip in 1960. Before there were astronauts up on the moon, that was done to the Mariana Trench, 7 miles down, but nobody has been there since. Why not? It's part of the planet that is unique. 16,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Some of us were dreaming, going back probably 15 years ago, saying, you know, we think that we've been to the North Pole, but who has actually been to the real North Pole? It's not up there on the ice, it's down there through the ice on the bottom. And among those who were dreaming were my longtime friend, Anatoly Sagalovich, who's the designer of the 2 Russian Mirsovs that go to 6,000 meters, to a little bit more than half the ocean's depth. The United States does not have a system like that today for manned access. We do have some underwater robots that go that deep, but Japan, Russia, France, and now China has a system that they're developing. They call it Harmony. It will go to 7,000 meters, but nobody can go back to 11,000 meters to 7 miles down. But I got a phone call, August 2007, from Anatoly Sagalovich, the submarine designer. He called from the North Pole. Out of the blue, I wasn't aware of what was going on until I got this call, and I didn't even get the message. I got it as a voicemail message on my cell phone. I was so impressed I recorded it. It went something like this. Sylvia, this is your friend, Anatoly Sagalovich. I am calling you from the North Pole. I have just come back from 4,200 meters down. The real North Pole. Our dream he made come true. And he said, and then in the background you could hear the clinking of glasses and Russians hooping it up, surely with lots of vodka. And he said, this is a great achievement for science. And there's more laughing and the clicking in the background. And he said, but it was our achievement, our achievement. Russia was staking a claim of a sort. They actually put a titanium flag at the North Pole in the heart of the Arctic. The Arctic is up for grabs. It is. And what we do on our watch will make all the difference in the world forevermore. We have one chance to get it right. Which way will we go? Exploit, exploit, exploit? Or, as we did with the Antarctic half a century ago, agree to just put everything on pause, have a moratorium until we know better how to move. So I just want to take you there with this little last clip that will show you Anatoly Sagalovich going to the North Pole and a few other things. Gleaming starkly white, the frozen Arctic Ocean crowns the top of the world above 66 degrees north latitude. In the Arctic, above the ice and below, wildlife prospers in what might seem to be an inhospitable environment. but it's exactly what is required for polar bears, ring seals, and the snowy white beluga whales, the highly vocal canaries of the sea. Narwhals, the legendary unicorns of the sea, and bowheads, the great ice whales, thrive there and nowhere else on Earth. In the cold, dark waters of the Arctic, life abounds, as it has for millions of years, unknown, unseen, and still largely unexplored. Under the ice, and actually within the ice itself, life is surprisingly rich and diverse. Photosynthesizing organisms cast a green glow across the sweep of the ice. Arctic birds, fulmars, guillemots, kittiwakes, and ivory gulls survive on a diet rich in Arctic cod, while murres dive down as deep as 100 meters in search of fish and squid. Walruses look elsewhere for meals, using their great tusks to plow into the soft underwater terrain to extract clams, worms, and other tasty morsels. And deep within the heart of the Arctic, 4,200 meters down, is the North Pole, visited for the first time in August 2007 by 6 explorers in a pair of Russian submarines, Mir 1 and Mir 2. For hours, they observed and documented the seafloor, struggling to understand the nature of polar life far below the surface. The struggle to reach the North Pole at the Arctic's surface has lured hardy explorers for centuries. Robert Peary and Matthew Henson claimed the first successful expedition in 1909. Other explorers to the Arctic Ocean have sought the fabled Northwest Passage, a direct shipping route from Europe to Asia across the polar ice. Today, global warming is melting the ice cap so fast that scientists expect the passage to become a reliable summer shipping route within a few decades. That's good news for shipping, but bad news for polar bears, Arctic seals, and the people of the Arctic, whose cultural heritage is inextricably linked to living in a realm dominated by ice and snow. Keen interest is now focused on the Arctic and its nature, particularly because of the magnified importance of the frozen northern waters in shaping global climate and weather, the circulation of ocean currents, and ultimately, the well-being of humankind. So people ask me, I get asked a lot, what can I do? I'm just one little person. Kids ask that a lot. And I say to everybody who asks what I have asked of myself, first, you hold up the mirror. You hold up the mirror and figure out what it is that you do, especially what you do well. Do you sing? Are you good with numbers? Do you have a way with words? Do you have a way with kids? Whatever it is that you do, whatever you love, or whatever you can learn to love, to use as a way to make a difference, do it. And don't wait for somebody else to ask you. Just do it. Be brave. I have had to force myself to be more courageous sometimes, to talk to people like John Hankey and challenge him to do something about Google Earth. It was a really, why would I do that? I guess because I felt that it really needed to be said, even though it might have been taken as an insult to somebody who'd worked for a big chunk of his life to do something wonderful, and then somebody comes along and And, you know, says, but you should call it Google Dirt. Oh, well. But to be idle, to be complacent, to know something and not do something, that's going to see us go into a continued downhill slide. But if you just follow your heart and believe, as I do, that we do have a chance, more than a fighting chance, to turn things around. But it's really going to take people, everybody, doing something. It can be a little something, or it can be a big something, but to not just give up. There are so many who say, why should I bother, because the problems are just so big. They are big. And that's probably part of the reason that we should feel empowered to do these things, because we can, because we must, if there is to be a future for us, for our species. And now is the time, as never before, because now we know, maybe as never again, because if we keep going the way we are, we're going to lose the chance that we now have to save tunas, swordfish, coral reefs, the Arctic, rainforests, the Great Lakes, the future. Not just for the kids way out there sometime in the future, not just for our grandkids, for our kids, but it's also for ourselves right now. The world is not as great in a natural world sense as it was when I was a kid. I'd like to see us turn the corner and to know that the investment we can make on our watch will really pay off. We can do it. I'm in. I hope you too are in. Thank you.
Dr. Earle has time to take a few questions. I know we're running a little long, but it's been very interesting. Thank you so much. We have 2 microphones. We'll float around. If you raise your hands, we'll bring the microphones to you.
I like that idea of floating around.
And if you could stand up so we can see where the question's coming from, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, Dr. Earle. There is an organization that takes human remains that have been cremated and then makes fish habitat. Do you know of any reason why that would be a negative thing to do?
Only from the person's standpoint, who might not have a choice. No, I don't see any particular reason why not. Depends on what is in the material that is
I think
used.
they mix it with cement and then they sink it in the ocean. And so then you can
live
with the fishes
live
and
on.
create habitat.
Well, make a fish house. That's kind of a nice thing, I think. Why not? You can have coral growing on you, and barnacles and things.
Dr. Earle, over here, over on the other side.
Okay, gotcha.
I want to thank you for coming here. Your talk to be warm and wonderful, and you had a wonderful sense of whimsy. I get that appreciation for the sense of whimsy also from the late Fred Rogers. There are some people's products that I love, and I refuse to let them not continue to be known. I organize a National Won't You Be My Neighbor Day to remember the memory of Fred Rogers. I saw you on the neighborhood. It was wonderful. Also, I am part of another company that I love called the Shackley Corporation. And there are many of us who know you because of that, and also because of that, I want to say that we are very happy and very proud of the work that you do. Continue to do it.
Thank you. Plenty of reason for hope. Thank you.
Question back over on this side. Dr. Earle.
Over to your right.
Oh, sorry. You're talking to me? Yeah.
Thank you so much for a really enlightening afternoon. sometimes feel, as you said at the end, that sense of smallness that I'm only one person, what can I do? And I wonder if you could just give us maybe, writing my congressman is just not working for me these days. So are there like 2 or 3 specific, like for example, I've stopped eating halibut. I love halibut. But I can't eat it anymore. What are some, maybe 2 or 3 specific things people could take home today and say, I'm going to start doing that today?
I like what Mrs. Obama has done to the White House lawn. She's digging it up. She's planting a garden. I think that during previous times when things got a little rough, we had victory gardens. We used the space we had in a powerfully productive way. And it doesn't mean that you can't, you can go out and buy things from a grocery store, but we should think increasingly of what we're consuming and what a footprint it has on the natural world. I suggest that people should think about, if they want to eat fish, consider those that are low on the food chain and that we can grow under controlled circumstances, closed systems, catfish, carp, tilapia. Not all of the ways that they are grown turn out to be the best, but one example, at the island school, Peter Wege has been a founding member of the group that started the island school in the Bahamas. They have a setup where the students take care of tilapia in a big tank, and the water from the tank that is enriched by the fish, nitrates, phosphates, flows into a hydroponic garden where lettuce and other vegetables are grown that they actually consume when you go to the island school. They are so proud of their fresh green salads and things. And they serve tilapia. Tilapia, like chicken, takes about 2 pounds of plants to make a pound of protein. Cows, about 20 pounds of plants and a lot more water. With these closed systems, you get, as they say in the aquaculture fields, more crop per drop. And it works. It takes a lot of water to make a cow. It takes more water to make a tuna. But if you have a closed system, we've learned a lot from the aquariums that have been developed in the last 50 years or so. And you can actually have a light footprint. When I say to people in response to what can I eat, tilapia, catfish, carp, but I don't mean catfish imported from Taiwan or tilapia that has moved across from one side of the world here. A huge carbon footprint, and you have no idea how they were raised or what cost to the area where they were grown. But if you can identify the source, Barbara Kingsolver, in her little essay or book actually called Animal Vegetable Miracle, talks about living and dining on things that are as close to home as possible. Because then you know the source, it's good for you, it's good for the carbon footprint that you have. And even though she gave her husband license to have coffee, which they don't grow in the Appalachian Hills where they did this little experiment for a year, but I think it's not just an experiment, it's a way of life. Be conscious of what you're consuming. I used to consume tuna without a second thought, but now I know and I can't do it anymore. I just can't. I know too much. I know it takes on the order of 100,000 pounds of plants to make a pound of tuna that's 6 or 7 years old. It's just because of the way the food web works. Carnivores eat carnivores, eat carnivores, eat carnivores in the sea. So there's this huge, look at a 10-year-old kid. How many Big Macs have gone into making a 10-year-old kid? Or a 50-year-old person. Think of all the huge investment in making you. And the older the fish or other creature that you're consuming, the bigger the bite out of the ocean. And we tend to eat carnivores that also are loaded with the things you don't want to use. So it's knowing, making choices. Another friend, Peter Knights, runs an organization called Wild Aid. His mantra is good advice about making choices. He says, when the buying stops, the killing can too. When the buying stops, it's the buying power. When you buy, you're voting. You're voting. When you go out and buy bluefin or other tunas, Not all tunas are in the terrible shape that bluefins are, but they're all carnivores and they're all greatly depressed over what they were when I was a kid. So I just say no. Huh, that's easy. There are other things that you can eat. The reason that we're so successful as a species, in part, is because we're omnivores, we're generalists. We have a wide range of temperature. We can build houses to protect ourselves from the ups and downs and we can consume many things that will sustain us. So make better choices. I mean, you don't have to have caviar every day. We don't eat, I keep thinking about snow leopards as the equivalent of tunas. That we've gotten away from that. Yes, one more.
Doctor, I understand at the end of the Mississippi River, there's a big sludge area.
Dead zone.
I understand also out in Hawaii, there's that way. How can that be cleaned up?
Start at the source is a good place to begin. Typically it's the upstream source of nitrates, phosphates, mud, sediments, plus toxins that are damaging to the natural system. And what you get are a few species that thrive with high nitrates, high phosphates, and can tolerate the poisons that come down from fields and farms and backyards and even, dare I say, golf courses that flood into the sea and diminish the diversity, but a few things prosper and they just go like crazy because there's no competition. They have big blooms of a handful of very robust, tolerant species that gobble up all the oxygen, and literally you get a oxygen depleted area, a dead zone. And 50 years ago, nobody thought about dead zones. There may have been some places that were polluted in coastal waters, but nobody called them that. That really wasn't such a big deal. About 15 years ago, I listened to the current head of NOAA, Jane Lubchenco, talk about dead zones, and at the time, the numbers were up from 50 that had been there about 10 years before to 150. Now there are several hundred, more than 300 dead zones, not just the Mississippi River, not just Santa Monica Bay or Tampa Bay or Chesapeake Bay, all over the world. It's the result of upstream activity. So you want to clean them up, turn off the faucet first, stop the flow of these noxious things into the water, but at the same time, try not to continue to disrupt what's there. I mean, like trawling in the areas in the Gulf of Mexico, keep stirring things up and making it harder for stability to return. It sounds like a silly thing to protect a dead zone, but in fact, if you do, and try to reduce the amount of upstream input and at the same time give the creatures who naturally live there a chance to recover, it's probably the best thing we know how to do. Chesapeake Bay, I say stop killing the oysters and the clams and the menhaden and the crabs. I mean, people say, oh, I can't stop eating crabs, or, oh, I love my oysters. Well, if you really love your oysters, then stop killing them for a while. Maybe someday you can do it again, or maybe you can start figuring out how to grow them successfully in a place where you have a light footprint. But to continue in Chesapeake Bay, to kill the natural filtration system, raking the bottom destroys the sponges that are really great filter feeders. Oysters are real champions in this respect. But we can't get over this habit of consuming wildlife. But if we can't, then it's going to be a lot harder for us to make some progress toward recovery. If we can, it means that maybe we deserve the title Homo sapiens. Maybe.
We've got just a couple more questions.
Hi, Doctor. Thanks so much for your inspiring lecture. I just want to say that I have in my pocket a list of fish to eat and fish not to eat. I carry it in my pocket calendar. I use it every time I go to a restaurant, and I think I got it from the Environmental Defense Fund. So if it's Googled Environmental Defense Fund, anybody can get this list of fish to eat and not eat.
It's not good enough.
I would like to know what is better.
Oh, okay. Catfish, carp, and tilapia.
All right.
Oh, and broccoli. No, I'm serious. And I mean, you really, I don't suggest that everybody stop, not cold turkey, but cold fish, I guess. But know what you're eating and really try to understand, and don't expect to have all the shrimp you can eat all the time, everywhere. Vote with your purchasing, and let people understand that this is artificial, what we're now enjoying. And I love the Environmental Defense Fund. I was on their board for their early years. The Monterey Aquarium. I am a very strong proponent and fan of theirs. The Blue Ocean Institute. They all have cards of this sort, but I like the one best from New Zealand, from Forest and Bird organization. They have a red list. It's very long. They have an orange list. It's very long. They have a green list. It's very short. And they, in the end, say that their criteria are based on health of the populations. Are there lots of them out there, or are there not so many? The second criteria is how are they caught? Destructive fishing techniques like trawling or long lines? Really bad, especially trawling. But long lines are equally horrible. Or drift nets. Some of the systems that just take the whole, are indiscriminate, are part of why we're losing so many marine mammals and birds and lots of other things. So, and the third criterion is bycatch. How much stuff gets caught in the process of catching the fish that you're eating? With shrimp, it's like at least 10 to 1. Some people will try to convince you it's only 5 to 1. But do you throw away 5 cows for every cow that you eat? In the ocean, throw away this much to get this much. It's not a recipe for common sense. Farmed salmon, they're carnivores. So you take this many wild fish to get that many farm fish, and they're loaded with the things you don't want in you. So take wild salmon. There are only a few places in the world where wild salmon populations are still in pretty good shape. And so now they're being marketed all over the world as the safe fish to eat because they're wild. They're not these crummy old cultivated farm salmon. But they are carnivores. It takes a lot of little fish to make even the wild ones, let alone the farmed ones, and they're full of the things you don't want in you. And I think if you would go stand next to the bears and the eagles and you snatch a salmon from between the paws of a grizzly, go for it.
I'm going to modify my list. Thanks a lot. And I just like, my quick question is, how can we accomplish what you and I want to achieve without getting actively involved in politics?
Well, is there something wrong with getting actively involved in politics? I mean, what is politics, I guess? I was, I suppose, actively involved. I took a position as the chief scientist of NOAA. It was an appointment by George Bush, and I was there for 2 years. And I am so glad that I did it because I learned a great deal about how systems work. I think I might have made a little bit of difference while I was there. Jane Lubchenco, who's now the chief scientist, the head of NOAA, I was just the chief scientist, she's the big boss. It's true government service if you really care. And if you are so inclined and allowing yourself to be sacrificed as a mayor or a city council member or whatever it is, you can really make a difference in that position. I think that if you have the opportunity to get involved, it's one way. It's not for everybody, for sure. I think the best investment is in knowledge, and especially with the kids. But it's also finding the kid in everybody, to make everybody have that same sense of wonder that little kids have naturally, and ask why, who, what, where, and never stop asking questions. We stop asking questions. You just go to the grocery store, you see that there's stuff there, and you never ask, where did it come from? What's the real cost of it? What's in it that I don't want in me? You just say, well, somebody has thought about this. No, everybody has to think about this and make choices that are not just better for you, but they're the best hope we have for a life, a world that is good for all of us.
We have time for just one more question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Earle. Is there any problem with wind turbines in the ocean or the Great Lakes? Do you see any problem with that?
I think that's a loaded question. But I could just say what I believe to be so. There's no free lunch. Trade-offs are trade-offs. You get this and you give that up in the process. Wind as a source of energy has certain promising aspects. It's bad news for birds and bats and insects. But engineers are doing, some of them are at least, trying to devise systems that for harnessing wind, that the big turning props move in such a way that they at least minimize the damage to the creatures in the sky. But then underwater, you're going to change something. You know, every footprint makes a change, and that's a pretty big footprint. I think before you can sign on to it as a really positive thing, you should look at what the trade-off is. And I don't have answers, but it should be, you should be able to be satisfied yourself that there's a great need for this, and therefore the cost, environmental costs, I don't mean the other kinds of costs, we are willing to put on the line because of the benefits that we'll get down the other, or they're not, that you'll see that diverting the water in such a way in the turbines has a cost that is not just measured in obvious dollars and cents, but there are other values, other costs that we have to begin to account for. That's not a straight answer, but it's the kind of thought, you know, we have to put into these decisions that are now upon us. I think harnessing hydroelectric power once seemed like the really best thing to do, except that we only thought of rivers as water and a source of power. We didn't think of it as home for creatures that have no alternatives. And whether it's salmon or other fish that come upstream and are met by these big dams that give us something we want, but we take away from other things, and even we're taking away from ourselves. But sometimes it's worth it. We have to understand the whole picture, and this is the thing. I mean, this is the first time that we have been able to really look at the whole picture with with new eyes and see the connections. It's still not perfect by a long way, but it's better than it's ever been. And we still have some time. So I wouldn't just leap into wind or the turbines that you're talking about and saying, well, it looks like a good idea to me. Engineering-wise, we can do this. Doesn't mean you should do it. Like the Florida Cross-State Canal or the replumbing of the Florida Keys, or rather the Everglades. You can do it, but then you think, what are the trade-offs? Should we do it? Are there better ways to get from here to there? I'm not saying that it's bad, but you really need to know so you can have an informed decision.
Please join me again in thanking...
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to thank the Wege Foundation for bringing Dr. Earle here today. There is a reception taking place in the Wege Speaker Center, which is across campus. If you need directions, there will be people at the front door who can guide you. Thank you again for being with us this year.
Thank you.